what do parents really want from schools and from teachers? I mean, that's such an important question to ask. In the greater education community, we really can't do our job if parents and teachers or parents in the school is at ends with each other. So what I thought of doing is speaking to an expert in the field of technology, in leadership, but specifically also somebody who's a parent of children in school, to find out what it is that parents really want from schools and from teachers. My name is Francois Nordia, and I am an expert in education, but I assist you in teaching like the superhero that you really are. And in today's episode, I'm interviewing Mike Stopforth. Now, Mike is passionate about exploring ideas and building value at the intersection of leadership, technology, and impact. And I think that is so important, that we understand how education, and especially the relationship between parents and teachers, or parents and the school, can build the future that we really want for our learners. So it's amazing to speak to somebody that is a leader, somebody that is the CEO of multiple companies. In actual fact, Mike is the CEO of Digital Leadership Academy Beyond Binary, and is also the co-founder of 48 Hours. It is a social media crisis consultancy, and the work I've seen they do on social media is awesome. So whenever a school finds themselves, or any company, but specifically in our instance, if a school finds themselves, in hot water with social media content, this is a company that you can knock on their door, and they'll assist you with how to handle the crisis around your PR and around the brand for your school. But nevertheless, I think you'll enjoy this conversation about what it is that parents really want. But towards the end of the interview, because Mike is such a guru when it comes to technology and the future of technology and the future of business and leadership and these things, I wanted to know from him, what can teachers really do to assist kids in adopting these digital skills? What is it that kids can do, or teachers can do, so that they create these environments in school that kids can learn the technologies or the skills that they really need? And his answer blew me away. So go and definitely, if you don't watch the entire interview, go towards the end, skip towards the end for the last question, and just see what he said about what teachers should do. I think it's very inspiring, very innovative, that what his answer was, and I agree with a lot that he said. But anyway, if you get the opportunity, please smash that like button or subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so yet. But with all that being said, stay super. Mike Stopforth, thank you so much for joining us on the Teach Like a Superhero podcast. It's such a privilege getting the opportunity to interview you. Welcome.
Yeah, it's so lucky to be here, man. I was just saying before the call started that you get this privilege via the internet of developing these like digital friends, right? Like you have these networks of people that you're connected to exclusively through these channels, but never really get to connect with properly. You're one of my favorite internet friends, so it's a pleasure to be here.
You are so good for my ego, Mike. It's awesome to get to speak to you in real time, and not only on text-based and on the different social media platforms. So what I wanted to do with this episode, I saw you got interviewed by mutual friends of ours from the Edu Inc. boutique school. And I thought, you know what, it's so important. Typically on this podcast, we interview teachers or academics or principals, people who work within education, trying to give value to our teachers and to schools. But I think what's lacking from this podcast is the parent's voice, because it's so important to have that relationship between the school and the parent. And it would be remiss of me not to start interviewing parents. And then who better to speak to than somebody that is a parent who's got children in school, but also works within the digital space and assists other leaders in bringing in digital transformation into their businesses. So I think what I wanted to ask you, Mike, as a parent, I do a public talk at schools at Parents' Evening, speaking about parents and the decisions that they need to make. And it's something crazy, like in the first year of a child's life, a parent needs to make 1,750 decisions. And that's only like in the first year. But one of the decisions, of course, is about their education and where you will send your child. Is that something that you've gone through in the decision-making process? Like, what do you look at when you decide for the education of your children?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Francois, such a big question. And I think, the large majority of parents, this is probably the first thing they consider when they know that they're going to be welcoming a new life into the world. And you hear these rumors of people that are lining up waiting lists as soon as they find out that they're pregnant, and, to try and get into the best schools, because, there are very few parents that don't want the absolute best for their children. So it's always going to be a major priority from day one. The reasons why you would choose one institution over the other are certainly not simple. And the more I've thought about this, and the more I had the privilege of chatting, as you said, to the Edgy Inc. guys the other day, we realized that actually there are multiple variables that impact on this, and more so recently than, say, when you and I were kids and our parents made similar choices. We are less limited, for example, by geography these days. We're probably less influenced, to a greater or lesser degree, by which schools we went to when it comes to choosing schools for our own children. Whereas in the past, it was not, I think, uncommon for your children to attend the school or the institution that you attended by default, almost like a hereditary choice. But these days, if you are privileged and fortunate enough to be able to choose between multiple institutions, there are many different options, and we are very lucky in South Africa that we both have a very, in many instances, and certainly from a suburban perspective, a pretty strong public schooling sector, relatively strong, and then also, a number of different private options if you are able to afford and choose between those. But yeah, for us, so to make it very personal, and for a bit of context, I have 3 children, 2 children from a first marriage, and then a little 7-year-old from my second marriage. And my eldest is 17. He's just written his final grade 11 exam today. So he's almost at the end of his schooling career. But his mom, my ex, is a school teacher. And so she was very active in the decision-making process pretty much from day one with those kids. And then, of course, my second wife is not a school teacher. She's an entrepreneur like me. So in that instance, I was a lot more active in the decision-making process. So I think, there's so many different variables that go into it. But to kind of end a very rambling sort of introduction there, and forgive me for that, I think what schools, what teachers, what principals, leaders, maybe the institution in general, underestimate is how disproportionate a role the influence of my social network is on my choice of schooling for my children. So I think that you probably think that we do a lot more due diligence than we actually should do about these momentous decisions in our children's lives. And often the decisions are made based on the influence of our close network, where our friends are taking their kids, or what our friends deem to be a good or reputable institution, or in many cases where our children's friends are going, right? That's also a big factor. And needless to say, that's not always the best reason for picking an institution, but is, I think, a disproportionately influential component of that process.
So right. I mean, parents are so concerned about the education of their children. And as you said, nobody goes into parenting thinking like, you know what, I want to screw up this kid's life. And we want to make the best decisions that we possibly can. And that's why you say, like, the word of mouth kind of reputation of a school is what drives this. I don't think that many parents actually go and do, school visits, or go and sit in the classroom, or try and find out exactly what is happening in school. But like, by word of mouth, getting to know the reputation, that assists in the marketing of the school.
Yeah, certainly. And like I said before, that word of mouth is, you know, I've always said in the business world, there's no more powerful form of marketing than a happy customer, right? And we don't necessarily lean on those recommendations because we believe our friends have done the due diligence that we didn't do. We lean on them because we trust our friends as much as we would trust them to recommend a restaurant. You know, so it's that's why I say I think it's a very disproportional leaning amount of influence. And as you rightly put it, you know, schools are in many instances heavily reliant on their brands and what is said about those schools versus maybe what is actually happening in those schools in reality. And I think there are many you know, significant and powerful, influential institutions that still trade heavily on their brand as opposed to offering the very best in education. So yeah, I think it's been interesting because my kids are quite far spaced apart. There's a 10-year gap between my eldest and my youngest. So even in that 10-year gap, I've seen shifts in the industry. I've seen shifts in the options that are available to us. We've seen new entrants into the market that have dominated and spread at a rate of knots and created quite an almost franchise-like model of schooling. So it's really interesting to see how those types of institutions are changing the face of this universe, right?
Exactly. But now, I mean, it's almost like it's built on this house of cards kind of thing. It's like the emperor's new clothes. Like if a school can, you know, give the image that this is a good school, then they would attract more, you know, like many of the private schools are currently driving around the bums on seats. Like we need to get people into the schools because there's a bottom line and we need to be a profitable institution. But once the parents have made the decision and they've placed their children in the school, what keeps the kids in the school is so important. So what would you say for you and maybe like for other parents that you know, what would you say are these elements that makes you like stick with the school that you've decided to put your kids in?
Yeah, I mean, look, the primary and I guess most proximal metric is the happiness of your child, or at least your understanding of the level of happiness of your child. It's quite difficult to know how your child is performing or achieving, though, because you don't really have benchmark. You don't have my child in the other school versus my child in this school. You know, you don't have a control for that experiment. So it's very difficult to know whether or not they're achieving or being fulfilled at the level that you hope and wish for them. So a lot of that again is anecdotal, and I guess we function primarily on hope and trust in that regard. And I mean, that was our experience. Our little one, our youngest, went to a school that we chose predominantly on the basis of its reputation and proximity to us. Her name was down at a couple of other schools. We weren't entirely unhappy with the experience of her first 2 years there. But when we were contacted by another school, and I'll mention the name of the school she's at now. She's at St. Peter's in Sunninghill. When we were contacted by them to say, you know, we've actually got a space for Ayla next year. We didn't actually anticipate that we would. And we went and met with them. Suddenly we had a comparison. And what blew us away was we were suddenly quite, now that we had the comparison, now that we had a sense of what the other environment focused on, held as important, concentrated its efforts and resources towards, we were like, okay, well, actually, maybe there are some things that are missing in the other environment. And so made a conscious switch on that basis. But it's tough. You know, I think a lot of parents defer or kind of, what's the best, delegate you know, a lot of responsibility for their children's well-being and development to the school, which is never a great idea. And it's certainly one of the dysfunctions of the current relationship between parent and school. And I think in so doing, we lose sight of the reality that the relationship, I guess, that the school and the parent has is one of partnership. Mm-hmm. It's not a service provider, right? Like we're not outsourcing this role or this responsibility or accountability. It's like, how do we get the most out of this little being by working together to the best of our ability? But that is not always how it's positioned. And it's not always, certainly from the, to kind of point the finger back at parents, not always how parents or what we expect of those institutions.
What teachers often complain about, and I know this happens in the private school sphere a lot, is because the fees are so high, and the parents, rightfully so. I mean, you're expecting quality education for the price that you're paying, but parents are often making this equivalence of, I'm paying a lot of money, therefore my child should be this product of education. And unfortunately, there isn't that correlation between the amount of money you're paying for education and the success that the child will reach because of that education.
Whether or not your child is a tiny demon, yes. Yeah, I mean, you don't pay the school for quality parenting, as you said. You pay the school for quality education. However, and this is another thing that, back to our point about branding earlier on, and the desire for schools to emphasize a differentiator and a USP, right? What's our school's angle that makes us more compelling than, say, the school down the road, 5 kilometers down the road, that the parent would consider instead of us. It can be tempting, I think, as a school to make the promise of taking on more of that responsibility, right? Creating almost an expectation that there's more that they'll do outside of the realm of just ensuring a great education. And so sometimes that is an expectation that is created. And I think the wrong types of parents or parents that have deferred some of that responsibility might take advantage of that. Not helping the dynamic at all. Not helping the kid either.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, let's make sure that we know what our mandate is and what the role of the teacher is. We know what the role of the school is, but just as well that the parent understands what the role of the parent is, because you often also get the case where parents get over involved, we call the helicopter parents, or the parking lot parents that just sit in the parking lot and wait for the first thing to happen so they can jump in and assist. And that also isn't helpful.
Yeah, no, sure. I think I'm actually the opposite of it. What would you call the opposite of a helicopter parent?
A good parent.
I'm like an earthworm parent. Like and it's not to say that I'm not involved. It's just that I'm not like, I think maybe because my mom is a public school teacher. She taught grade 1 for 40 years. My aunt is a public school teacher, taught grade 3 for 45 years. As I said, my ex-wife is a teacher. I think I've seen it from that side as well. And so maybe I occupy an almost opposite end of the scale response, where I like, I don't want to interfere at all, right? I want the teacher to have the space to do what they need to do and to play the role that they need to play. But I think there is certainly a happy medium, absolutely no doubt whatsoever. But I think also that the way that we maintain that is by being very clear about the role of the different. It's one of the things that I've really appreciated about this school, about St. Peter's, is they're very clear about what their expectation of us as parents is. Here's what we need you to do to ensure that this little person's life is as fulfilled, healthy, and whole as humanly possible, right? This is what we're going to do. This is what our senior team is going to do. This is what you as a community of parents need to do. I mean, one of the advantages of the school is this incredibly strong sense of community amongst the parents. And I think being explicit about that and then fulfilling on those promises is a pretty big deal.
Yeah. And what the latest research shows is actually that the better parent-teacher relationship is the one where the parents back off. It's one of the most important decisions that a parent can make is which school to send your child to. And I think a lot more due diligence needs to be done by parents in deciding which school they're going to send the child to. But what parents should do then, after they've decided which school to send the child to, is to take a step back and not interfere. You've now made the decision that this is an excellent school. You've got the proof. This is a great school. I've made my decision. The kid is in the school. Now I'm stepping back. I'm giving the child everything that they need. I'm giving the school the support that they need. But being an over-involved parent it's almost catastrophic, but also the influence of you being over involved versus you not being involved at all is very slight.
What would you, well, if you were tasked, Francois, with creating the the average parent's due diligence checklist, right? Like I've got a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old. I'm making big decisions about their primary school education with their future education in mind. What are the major things I should investigate when considering, assuming again that I have the resources and capability to be able to choose between multiple institutions? And I appreciate that not everybody does, but assuming that I do, what would you put on that list of like, these are the things you absolutely should understand and know, and investigate?
Top of my list would be quality teachers. Now, of course, it's difficult to define that, and that's why I've got like being a super teacher. Like, what does that really mean? But in essence, it comes down to, can a teacher teach the content in a relevant way that is of meaning to the child, and of course, the child's development into the future. Like, quality of teachers is undisputable, because the child is going to spend the majority of their time in the classroom with the teachers. And the mandate of the school is to educate. So it's about content, it is about skills, it's about values and that development. So if you're a school and you can employ the best teachers that you can, who can design lessons that are focused exactly on this, I think that should be like the major priority. So quality of teachers, and then I just
want to, if it's okay, Francois, I just want to harp on that point, because immediately I'm like, but how do I do that? I mean, I can ask the, because what's going to happen is I'm going to go meet with the school, and they're going to have this like delegation of senior people that are going to be dressed beautifully and take me for a tour through the nice parts of the school and whatnot. But I'm not going to get. And are you suggesting that I should be a little bit more proactive about that and go, I want to sit in on lessons, I want to meet teachers, can I do that? Or how do we do that?
So that's part of the problem, is that we can't open the classroom to all parents and all adults. It's such a, but now this is where the digital transformation point comes in. A school that understands this will open their school digitally. That they would create content around their teachers. One of the first things I tell teachers, like, you should have a YouTube channel, you should have a TikTok channel, you should have a teacher page that's dedicated on your thoughts about how you develop your lessons, and record some of your lessons. Now, I don't mean that your lessons should be open to the public, but keep it unlisted, or keep a bank of it, that if parents ask, I would love to see your teachers teach. That the school can say, well, here's a bundle of a few lessons. Have a look at that. Now, you still sit with the same problem that you have with the open days, and just show the shiny ones. But the more your school starts opening up and being authentic about what's happening in schools, I think that's so important. And the marketing department of schools, I don't think, is really geared, or maybe they're just too afraid of the backlash that would come, that if maybe we don't have the best teachers, and if we open it up, we're showing vulnerability, we're showing that we're lacking. So but I think the schools that really get this is going to attract a lot more kids, because the parents, and especially if you look at the generations of parents, and especially new parents now, they're okay with digital, they're okay with social media, and they understand that. So that's way, like, if I want to know which school I want to send my child to, I'm going to see whether they've got an Instagram page, whether they've got a TikTok channel, how active they are on that, because that's part of the school's marketing. It's not a newspaper anymore. It's not advertising outside of the school on that's not where it's happening. Our parents are looking online. So what's the quality of your website? Are you giving an experience that the parent really sees the authentic classroom? And schools need to be more open about this.
I love that. I love what you're saying. Sorry, and I derailed you because you started with your first point on the due diligence, and then I jumped in on that. But what else would you suggest that parents look for?
So the second thing would be school infrastructure, because part of what makes a good teacher be excellent is the infrastructure that they teach in.
Yeah,
So
the foundation that they have around them. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So if you give them the tools to teach and you create the environment that's conducive to learning, in other words, things like teacher-child ratio, super important, massively important. The layout of the classroom. Why still have benches that's stacked in rows? Like you can't have that. That's not how we learn anymore, at least. But I'd say those two things, and then of course school leadership, the management of the school, because their role, and comes back to the teacher once again. Everything for me comes back to the teacher. But when the school management understands the importance of the teacher, they'll create an institutional culture that's suitable for the best teachers, and the best teachers would want to come and teach there.
Yeah, yeah. For me, I mean, Francois, that's going to be one of the biggest things, so because I think I see the correlations to business and entrepreneurship and how much of an influence leaders have on the culture of an organization and its ability to execute on its vision and its plans, and conversely, how destructive a toxic leader can be. And yeah, I think, sort of just two anecdotal stories there. One is watching my mom's journey in the same school, in Benoni Junior School, for 35 years. Obviously, she's worked under a number of different HODs and principals, and it's been remarkable how, all other things being equal, the school's the same, the buildings are the same, the infrastructure's the same, a lot of the teachers are even the same, but just replacing leadership, changing leadership, can have a monumental impact on that environment, the health of the environment, the quality of the children that are coming through, all of that sort of thing, right? So that was the one thing. And then the second thing is I had the privilege of attending the nonprofit program called Partners for Possibility, which I'm sure you've heard of, as a business partner, which must have been about 2016 now, I think. And I had the privilege of working with a principal of a school in Tembisa, who, I looked at this personality and this leader and what she had to achieve with absolutely zero support from the education department, very little support from the parent community around her, teachers that she had to actively and deliberately work with to develop and grow. It shocked me when I realized her training and development budget for her entire staff complement was less than 3 months school fees that I paid for one of my children. And I was like, wow, now that tells you a little bit of something about, and yet this was a school that was full of happy children, producing incredible results, fulfilled teachers, motivated people. I'm like, that's leadership for you. If you can do it without any of those resources or support, then you really are a remarkable leader, right? But yeah, I think that point, your third point, obviously quality of teaching, quality of infrastructure, but the efficacy of leadership. And I think a lot of the time that has to do with the principal, in the same way that it has to do with the CEO of a listed entity. It's going to have a disproportionate impact on the results that institution is going to be able to produce.
But here's the challenge. Principals are not necessarily developed or come from a leadership background or a managerial background. Principals are often teachers who wanted to be promoted, and the only place for them to be promoted in is going into the management and the leadership of the school. So there are very few pathways for a content specialist teacher to move up and be promoted. So your next step is going HOD, going deputy principal, going principal. And there are excellent teachers who want to be promoted, who want to progress in their career, but have got no interest in leadership whatsoever. So you've got a cohort of principals who understand the classroom or the classrooms that they were in, but they lack the necessary skills of organizational leadership. And I think this is one of the reasons why we have so many dysfunctional schools in the country.
Yeah, there's a saying in business, don't make your best salesperson your sales manager, right? Like, let them be your best salesperson. That's what they're good at. Don't belabor them with the challenges of people management and the admin and everything else. And I remember my mom was an HOD for a while, and eventually she's like, I don't want to be an HOD anymore because I'm barely teaching. I want to teach. That's what I love doing. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm good at. And actually left her HOD post and was far happier and far more fulfilled after that. So I think, yeah, a real challenge around how do you continue to motivate and develop people that are so committed to this, really this calling, this art form, year after year, when you also do want them to be ambitious and aspiring. Yeah, it's a tough balance to manage. You mentioned earlier on, Francois, I'm keen to hear from you. You mentioned earlier on that there's obviously a lot of schools in South Africa that are part of large corporate entities. The schooling brand, the body has been acquired perhaps by a conglomerate, and now the school that had previously focused on growth and efficacy and culture and whatever, now it has to please shareholders. And so the focus goes from being a really great school to being a really great business. Now, I don't think it's impossible to be both. I think it's conceivably possible to be profit-centric and still be a great educational institution. But I think it's hard because the incentives mean that you cut some corners that you wouldn't normally do. And one of the easiest corners to cut is teacher salaries. That's one of the first places you're going to do it, right? And that's going to have a direct correlation to the quality of the teacher. What is your experience been of working with teachers that are in schools that are very profit-centric versus working in schools that are essentially just a school in and of itself, not trying to be a business?
It's a mixed bag, because what the corporate kind of schools are offering is very attractive to your public school teachers, because it's a bit more of a salary bump, not necessarily, especially when you think about the benefits, but like money in your pocket end of the month, typically a bit more. And a lot of young teachers are very attracted to this kind of packaging.
Entry point, yeah.
But you've got this conflict that arises between quality education and what is needed for that, and then of course profit margin. So it's one place to cut is teacher salaries, and I think the reason why this is allowed is that parents don't necessarily know the difference. Like, okay, thank God I got my kid out of a public school. My child's now going to a private school. So regardless of what the quality of that education is, it's almost similar to what's happening in the good public schools. So, but now I can tell my friends my child's in a private school. So
interesting, yeah.
So parents just let it slide because it's comparable kind of education, but the teachers get paid less, so they get away with it. On the other hand, then you also maybe get away with having fewer learners per teacher ratio in these kind of schools, where the public schools, there's no control over this. You get overcrowded classrooms, so the atmosphere in which you teach is maybe a little bit more attractive than it was at the public school. But now you also need to understand that you're part of a product, you're part of a brand. So if the seats in your classroom isn't filled, your job is on the line, and then the safety net isn't there. So the teachers are often complain about, this is such a corporate, we're just focused on bums on seats. The management don't really care about education and the educational practices. They just want the kids, and more importantly, the parents, to be happy. And if the parents are happy, the kids stay in the school and we make profit. So you have this conflict between quality education and quantity of kids in the school.
Yeah, it's a real paradox, isn't it? And I mean, I think a lot of those corporate schools have been revolutionary for so many parents because they've had access to private schooling that they wouldn't normally have had access to. And I think on the balance of it, that's been good. On the balance of it, that's been an asset to education in South Africa. But certainly I can see the challenge, the very obvious conundrum that's presented with leadership when suddenly your incentives are are bent towards are bent towards margin. Yeah, and I suppose it also, but again, I've interacted with schools that are very clearly of the corporate ilk, that are absolutely phenomenal, absolutely incredible schools, and in the very same brand in a different location that is like abominable, like, for lack of a better phrase, like worse than the equivalent public offering, and 4 times the price at least. And then you realize again, what the major difference is not where it's based. It's not the area it's surrounded by. It's the leadership. Again, I think the right type of leadership in that school can still, within the confines of profit-centric modeling and planning, can still create an incredible environment, which is why I guess I harp on so much around the impact and the influence of principals in schools.
And my honest opinion about this is the public school system is going to fail. If we just look at, well, it is failing. I mean, there are pockets of excellence, of course, but in general, if we look at it, the answer to quality education is not going to be in the public sector. It is going to be in the private sector. And this creates opportunities, of course, and it creates competition. And that, at the end of the day, is also a good thing. But
I would agree with that.
The regulation in public schools is making it very, very difficult. The pace of change in public schools is making it very difficult, because even if you've got good leadership in the school, what they complain about again is their hands being tied and everything needs to be run through the district. It's very bureaucratic, and honestly, if a school has got certain admission criteria, the Department of Education at this stage is like, you know what, we don't have enough schools, so we're just going to put in kids and increase classroom size. They've been promising, I can't remember the exact amount of classrooms, but for next year, there's a massive amount of classrooms that will be built for the schools, especially in Gauteng, because that's where there's a lot of demand. So principals are over-enrolling their schools on the promise that they're going to get the infrastructure, and we often see that they don't get that infrastructure. So it's really snowballing in a very bad way.
Sure, it's terrifying to think. Very grateful that we have a choice as parents, right? It can't be easy if you feel that you are optionless and the children that you love and care for are stuck in an environment like that is just destructive,
So what I wanted to ask you, Mike, on the other side of your authorities, you work with business leaders and you assist them in digital transformation, and almost like moving into the 21st century and understanding what the future of the business or corporate space is going to be like, and getting them to be able to adapt to the environment. But all business leaders are going to need to employ the kids that are now in school. So they need to be ready to work in an environment where there's digital transformation or whatever the workplace is going to look like. And the people responsible to prepare them for that place of work are the teachers. Do you have some ideas? Do you have some maybe like advice for teachers on how can we today start preparing our kids for the world of work?
Yeah, it's such an interesting one, Francois, because on one hand, the vast majority of teachers, let's say established teachers, I mean, I'm 42 now. I think the teachers that are relatively experienced, that have had 10 to 15 years in the schooling environment, they can remember a world that was more analog than digital. They can still remember a world before mobile phones, before social media, and so on and so forth. So the vast majority of our most influential educators today are what I guess we would call digital immigrants, right? People that were born in the analog world and then immigrated into the digital world and have had to learn how to be digital, for lack of a better phrase, or to learn how to think digitally. Conversely, our children have been born into a digital era. They don't know what an analog world felt like. They don't know what it's like to be disconnected. They don't know what it's like not to have just an abundance of choice when it comes to content and media and connectivity and so on. So ironically enough, I don't think the role of the average teacher is to equip our children with digital literacy or digital capability or digital fitness, whatever we want to call it. I would argue it's actually quite the opposite, is that the skills that our children need today are skills of patience, resilience, critical thinking skills, knowledge acquisition skills. How do I find the right information when all the information is available to me? Like that's an interesting challenge, right? Skills of relationship building, of conversation, of planning, all of these things that I think have become easier to bypass because of the existence of these digital channels. I was listening to, I'm a fan of MMA, and I was listening to a podcaster talking to a young fighter the other day, and he was talking about his youth in New Jersey, in New York. And he was talking about how, like, for the large majority of his teenage years, he could say anything. He was so confident over text with his social circle or with a girl that he liked or whatever, but he was incapable of having a real conversation with anybody in the absence of his device, right? So I keep thinking that maybe our obsession as the educational institution in general with being more digitally astute is maybe not where the focus needs to be. Of course, we need to be digitally literate. Of course, we can't be teaching children about building capability and building an identity and building reputability in a digital world if we don't understand it at all. We need to at least have a handle on what's going on. But I don't know that we need to be more digitally fit than our children or our students or our learners, whatever it might be. I think they actually need a different set of skills from us, and it's a set of skills that we should be better at imparting. But yeah, I mean, I get very excited about the role that technology can play in education. I get excited about the potential disruptions that come from technological trends and platforms in the educational space. I get, when we think of, you spoke earlier on about just the configuration of desks in a classroom and how archaic some of our learning systems and methods are. I get very excited about how, technology could challenge some of that. But I don't, it's certainly not my expectation that my child's educators are going to equip them for a digital world. I think it's kind of unfair of me to expect that of them. Primarily, it's my role as a parent to equip my children in many of those respects. But also, I think I need help from the school to teach my children the things that technology is taking away from them.
I think that's so succinctly put, is that the role of the school is to actually teach some skills that they didn't grow up with or that they didn't develop natively. And in a world of being on digital platforms and growing up in digital platforms, there are a lot of social skills that get lost. And as you say, our generation, we claim to be, more analog than digital, but we should be able to impart that. So what a good teacher would do, regardless of, and I said earlier, infrastructure is important, but teachers don't necessarily have the control over this, is that what teachers need to do is design lessons that's going to, of course, teach the content, because the content remains important, but within an atmosphere where these skills and these values can be transferred and be developed.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more, sir. And I do hope that it will be one of the evolutions, one of the things that will crystallize out of the COVID dilemma and challenge over the last 3 years, is that we've been forced to think about this in a different way. And, we've been forced to adapt the way that we think about imparting knowledge just by virtue of the circumstances we find ourselves in. And I think that that's more exciting than it isn't. And I think there's more, institutions have certainly found ways to rethink and recalibrate their approach to, digital engagement. So hopefully we see as much of that prevalence in schools as we have in the corporate world.
Mike, I want to thank you for the time that we spent. I mean, the time has flown. It's all, you can see you're such a veteran in the podcast space, because at a stage I was being interviewed, I was interviewing back.
Can't help myself. It's terrible. I was like, shut up and stop asking questions.
No. I believe that's what's part of, learning, is that we need to have these authentic discussions and open the door to other people to listen to these kind of discussions. But it's a wealth of knowledge, and especially getting insights from the parents' view, but also around digital transformation and the world of work. Thank you very much for the time that you've spent with me. If anybody out there wants to know more about you and the work that you do, where can they go to find out more?
I spend way too much time on the internet, Francois. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Mike Stopforth, or at my website, mikestopforth.com. And if you want pictures of cats and me complaining about rugby, then Instagram or Twitter are probably a good option as well.
And there's a lot to complain about when it comes to rugby.
Indeed.
Mike, thank you. What I'll do is I'll put those links in the description of this video so everybody can move on over and get to know a bit more about Mike. Mike, thank you very much for being a super parent and assisting us to teach like the superheroes that we really are.
Oh, thank you for the work you do, my friend. You are having a very real and very measurable and very important impact on the world. So we appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Stay super.
Cool.